This conference will now be recorded.
So I'll just highlight a couple of things here and then open up for questions. But the one thing I've gotten asked the most questions about is the prescription drug monitoring program. Missouri is the only state in the country that does not have a statewide prescription drug monitoring program. In my opinion, it's long overdue. And unfortunately, we did not get that done this year. I was surprised because we passed it out of the House and they passed a slightly altered version out of the Senate. And it went back and forth a couple of times, but for whatever reason, the negotiations stalled at the end. It didn't get done, and now we still don't have prescription drug monitoring, which is frankly just a real pity. But hopefully, we'll pick that up next year and get that done finally. The other thing that I've gotten a lot of questions on in our community are the video lottery terminals. So right now, we've got the casinos, and I'm really sorry about that. So we have the video lottery terminal issue where they want to put the video lottery machines in casinos, or pardon me, in gas stations, liquor stores, laundromats, that sort of thing. And I know for a fact there's one of those machines not too far from Davidson, a neighborhood that I've gotten some calls on. Right now they're still in a gray area, so they're not going anywhere for the next year. And that was another disappointment. The other thing that has been in the news a lot is the Clean Missouri ballot initiative. And what happened in 2018 is it was on the ballot to change the way we redistrict every 10 years to create a nonpartisan demographer that would do that. That is being placed back on the ballot in 2020. And essentially we would go back to selecting our districts the way that we have done that in the past. And so that'll be on the November ballot. Another ballot initiative that has been in the news is the Medicaid expansion. I think 31 states now have expanded Medicaid. Missouri is not. There's a lot of resistance to doing that in the state. So there was a ballot initiative to put that on the ballot and let voters decide. Enough signatures were gathered to do that. And the governor just announced yesterday or the day before that that's going to be on the August ballot. So we will be voting on Medicaid expansion on the August ballot. We will be voting on the changes to Clean Missouri on the November ballot, and then we'll see what happens in 2022, because this is a census year, and then we'll get our first round of new districting under the new proposal in 2022. Something that I've been telling every legislative wrap up that I've had is, if you haven't filled out your census information yet, it's really important to our community to do so. You can do it online, but the more people that fill it out, the better off we will be. Scott, is there anything that is jumping out to you that I haven't discussed that I should?
I apologize. I missed some of that. I lost my internet connection, so I had to do a quick reboot, but I am back. One thing I wanted you to start off with was asking you about, you did a lot of work this session on the federal paycheck protection measures, and helped a lot of small businesses navigate that. Could you kind of give us a quick overview about where that stands and kind of what you think people need to keep in mind on those kind of things?
Yes, so that's a great question. Yeah, so the CARES Act opened up some relief for small businesses. The one that people have heard the most about is the Paycheck Protection Program. And before I get into that, I'll say this is, because so many people got laid off, the Missouri Department of Labor has gotten a ton of applications for unemployment. They're doing their best, but if anybody is trying to get through to labor for an answer and you're having a hard time, please call. My cell phone is 816-560-0593, or email me at west.rogers@house.mo.gov, no D in Rogers, and we can help you get to some answers from the Department of Labor. As busy as they are, they've been pretty receptive when they're trying to help people get on unemployment. So please keep that in mind. But as far as the small business assistance goes, when I'm not in the legislature, I sell and lease commercial dishwashers. We've got about 12 employees, and this has just been a big part of our life, is figure out how to navigate what resources are available for small businesses. And so one thing that we did at the state level, and I worked very closely with Senator Arthur on this, was the CARES money that came, and this gets a little bit confusing because there's different pieces of the CARES Act. Some of it goes to local government, some of it goes to small business, some of it, like the stimulus money that went directly to the taxpayers. So there's different pieces of that. But the piece that went to the state governments, there was some guidance from the federal government that said that money can be used as basically stimulus and grants to small businesses impacted by COVID-19. And so when we were debating what to do with this money in the House budget, I pushed really hard to set aside $200 million for businesses of less than 50 employees who are impacted by COVID to use as grants to help them get through this time. We did not get that through the first time in the House, but Senator Arthur picked it up in the Senate, and she was able to get $30 million earmarked for small business grants. That said, the governor and the Department of Economic Development are open to it, but they don't know if there's going to be enough money left in their budget to do that. So if that's something you're interested in, I would encourage contacting any other state representative or senator that you know, the governor's office, and make sure people know that that really is important money that could go a long way in helping our small businesses. Then the last piece of this, and I'd mentioned this a little bit already, is the Paycheck Protection Program loans. There's still a little bit of that money left, I think, but what it is an 8-week loan that's forgivable so long as you spend the money in a certain way. It's been in the news a lot for a lot of the wrong reasons, but when its intent was very good, and if you navigate it the right way, it's been a lifesaver for some small businesses. So if anybody has any specific questions about that, I'm happy to talk about that now, or I'm happy to talk about it tomorrow if anybody's dealing with a particular issue they're not certain on that.
So I know, and you touched on this a little bit, but I think what's on a lot of our minds is what is going to be the state of the budget for the state this year. Obviously, you passed a budget at the end of the session, but I don't think anybody really expects that what amounts are listed in that budget is exactly what's going to get spent, and that much of that is going to have to be withheld or ultimately cut. So give us an overview about where the budget stands and what you think is going to happen with it over the next year.
So, and that's a great question too. And the short answer, and I think everybody kind of expects this, is we don't know. But what we did, and I haven't been around long enough to know, I have heard from the veterans, this is an unusual way to do it, but we gave the governor an enormous amount of authority compared to most years, so he can cut where he needs to cut, and he's going to have to make some hard choices because there's just not going to be enough money to go around. I think the thing to keep an eye on that would make everybody's life a lot easier is if the federal government came through for the states and filled in some of these gaps in budgets, which will happen. And unfortunately, that's turned into a little bit of a political minefield where we're trying to blame different political parties for different state budgets. But that's ridiculous because there's not a state in this country that's not going to need some holes in their budgets filled. So I suspect they will work that out in Washington, D.C. and give us some relief from the federal government. But the long and short of it is we're just going to have to wait and see. I'm really sorry about that. So the bottom line is we're just going to have to wait and see. And there's just no way, I suspect every single piece of our state government is going to be negatively affected by this, even if we do get some relief from the federal government. And so to answer that, I suspect we'll be back sometime between the primary and the general election once we have a little bit better grasp of what we're looking at. But until then, we just need to see how quickly things rebound.
So you figure there will probably need to be a special session of some sort to try to steer the budget back toward reality?
I just don't know how else we do it because we don't, I mean, nobody's got a crystal ball for this, and we just don't know, one, how much help we'll get from the federal government, and two, what our tax revenue is going to look like. So I know for a fact that the governor's office has had conversations with every department from his office down through the entire state. And I think what he's asked is everybody to basically prepare a budget with, I think it was 20% less revenue than they were anticipating for worst case scenario. So they're definitely preparing for worst case scenario if they need to. And then we'll have to wait a couple of months and see what scenario we're actually dealing with.
If we do go to a special session, do you anticipate any other topics that would be discussed during that time?
Yeah, so I would hope we would be discussing other places where we could create some revenue, and the most obvious one of those is Wayfair. A lot of you may have seen in the news relatively recently that this online sales tax law from the Supreme Court came out that said we can tax out-of-state retailers, and most states have done that. Missouri has not, so we're losing some revenue by not implementing a sales tax through out-of-state purchases. And not only is that, from my perspective, is being involved with small business, it creates a disadvantage for our brick and mortar stores because you do have to pay sales tax if you're going to Missouri business to do business. You don't have to pay sales tax sometimes when you're buying things online. And then the other piece that comes with that is the additional revenue to the state. So I would really hope that if we come back in a special to look at the budget, that we're also looking at Wayfair, because that is the most natural place to find some additional revenue without any kind of tax increase.
Right. Of course, that sets up a fight over what's effectively raising taxes in the middle of a downturn.
And that's I don't think anybody in the House or the Senate thinks that passing some form of a Wayfair tax is a bad idea. The pushback is like Scott said, is that, there's a school of thought where anytime we do anything related to taxes, that we should offset that with some sort of tax decrease. So if we were to implement a Wayfair tax, there's a portion of the Senate that says they're unwilling to do that unless we find a tax decrease somewhere else, and that's just a philosophy that I frankly don't share. To me, it's not a tax increase. We're just capturing taxes that we've already said are something that exists.
Take this moment to remind. Sorry, I was just going to remind everyone that you are welcome to send in questions through the chat feature. You can write them on the, it looks like a little cartoon word bubble, and anything you send in, we can ask of the representative. So go ahead, Wes. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. And I was just going to say most of the negotiation for that will happen over in the Senate, and I've talked to Senator Arthur about that quite a bit, and I know it's their priority for them to work something out. So hopefully, if we do have a special session, they'll be able to sit down and negotiate something everybody can live with. But I certainly think that's going to be critical. And really, on that same topic, I think we're going to have to look at a lot of different ways to generate some tax revenue to our state without increasing taxes. So besides Wayfair, going into the next session, I would look forward to things such as, sports gambling is another one that's been brought up. That's something we're going to generate some tax revenue. But that's going to be a big conversation next year, is finding places in the budget, or finding new revenue without raising taxes.
You mentioned this a bit before, that the governor put the Medicaid expansion ballot initiative on the August ballot. Where does that figure into these budget discussions? Because my understanding is that if Medicaid is expanded, the federal government picks up most of the tab, but there's still about 10% of the costs that would fall on the state, and it's 10% of a pretty large number. And so you're adding costs, even though you're adding coverage, at a time when we're trying to trim the budget. So how does that figure into the discussion?
That's been a frustrating topic for me, because it depends on what you read. If you listen to the Democrats, they're going to tell you that it's that every state that's expanded Medicaid has seen some sort of it's actually been helpful to the state budget. And if you talk to the Republicans, they're going to tell you it's catastrophic and the state will go belly up if we expand Medicaid. And so I'm trying to find impartial data myself to figure out what's what. So the answer there is it depends who you talk to, and there's different models. I know I saw that Montana recently, where their state revenue definitely increased once they expanded Medicaid, and ended up being a positive thing. So I don't know the answer to that, other than the parties are saying different things. So I don't know. I tend to think that we can copy some of these more conservative states that have expanded Medicaid, and it'll end up being a positive to the budget, but we haven't done it. So maybe the Republicans are right, and maybe we're gonna have to make cuts in other places. I don't know the answer.
Right. And obviously, if there is a special session at the end, in the fall between the primary and the general election, by that point we will know whether or not voters have approved it.
And I think that was the reason that the governor used to move the vote up until August, because if we are going to do it, we do need to figure out how it's going to impact the budget. So that's a really good point.
Speaking of elections, obviously, we've got a number of them coming up here. We've got a municipal election, which is this coming Tuesday, June 2nd. We have the primary election, which is on August 4th, and we have the general election on November 3rd. The legislature did put in some protections for voters for at least some expanded ability to vote absentee. Can you explain what those changes are and what people need to know in order to vote successfully?
Yes, that's a great question. It's something I should have discussed already, and that's so for June, we didn't get it done in time. June will be the same as any other election, but for the primary and for the general, it'll allow voters to cast absentee ballots without providing a reason to election officials, so long as they're notarized. So if you can go get your ballot notarized, you can cast an absentee ballot. And that is definitely, in the past, we've not had any form of absentee voting unless you're going to be out of the jurisdiction. So that is new. And the way that's defined is anyone 65 or older or who is otherwise at risk from COVID-19 to vote absentee during the session. And I think most people can make a pretty good argument that that is them, so long as we are facing the pandemic that we're facing. And then allows anybody to vote by mail during the 2020 election that's notarized. So I'm being a little confusing there. As long as you get it notarized, you can vote absentee. That's the short answer for that, but not for the June election. So that won't vote effective until the primaries.
Hello, is everybody there?
I'm here.
Looks like Scott might have frozen up for a little while, but he may be back now.
I apologize.
Oh.
I have
Okay.
returned. Wes, I'm sorry. Please continue.
I'm just, your dog needs to start barking.
Yeah. Oh, give him time.
No,
Give him
so-
time.
So I would like to have seen us do more with the absentee ballots, but we did do something. As long as you get it notarized, you can vote absentee. But again, not for the June election. That doesn't go in effect until August in the primary.
Now, there were also some, there was a law that was changed that I think makes it easier to get things notarized. Does that help in this situation?
So I don't know the answer to that yet. So there's two different things. One is we did some electronic notary laws to change in the short term, and then in the long term we did pass a notary bill. Let me look that up because I don't remember exactly what we did there, but it did make things a little bit easier. I'm not sure. Let me check on that because maybe that didn't get across the finish line. But in the short term, you can get things notarized without being present. That is part of the governor's executive order to make things a little bit easier for the pandemic. But I thought we did a major overhaul of notary law in general, and I'm not seeing that on my list, so I'm thinking maybe that didn't get through to the finish line.
Yeah. I believe you're correct on the electronic notary. What I'm not entirely certain about is how that interacts with the ability to get ballots notarized. If that's something.
So I think what'll happen there is that's the emergency order. So I suspect, and I'll get the answer to this and follow up with you, but I would suspect that executive order will end prior to absentee balloting starting for the primary. So I don't think there'll be an overlap there. But I don't want to tell you something that's not right. So let me check on that.
Sure. Let's see. You touched on this a little bit, but I want to talk with it a little bit more detail. The thing that it's going to be on the November ballot, besides the obvious elections, is going to be what's called SJR 38, and that's the change to the redistricting plan. So just as background for everyone, 2 years ago, voters approved an overhaul of a number of things in the Missouri Constitution, including a provision that changes how we draw legislative districts. And now the legislature is putting something on this coming ballot that would change it to something similar to the old process, but not quite. So could you talk a little bit about what those changes are?
Yeah, so he gave a pretty good summary of it. In 2018, it was the Clean Missouri Amendment 1, and it did several things, including it changed the way that we do lobbyist gifts. So we reduced the amount the lobbyists can give any legislator to $5. The one thing that this new ballot initiative does that's good is it just eliminates lobbyist gifts altogether, so that'll go down to 0. But the real meat to the original Clean Missouri was changing the way that we draw our districts. And the way it's done now is by a bipartisan commission of Democrats and Republicans. What we did in 2018 was we took the bipartisan commission away and we created a process where the state auditor picks 3 different demographers out of anybody who applies and then sends that pool of 3 demographers to the Senate. They would select a nonpartisan demographer, and then the nonpartisan demographer would use a computer model to redraw our districts with partisan fairness and competitiveness. And right now, if you look at our hierarchy, partisan fairness and competitiveness are on the list, but they're pretty low on the list. And so basically what we want to do in 2020 is eliminate the changes that we made without even seeing if they work and go back to the way we had drawn districts in the past. So every 10 years we go through the census. We're going through the census right now, like I said. And so we'll use the new census data to draw new maps for 2022. Either we will draw the maps under Clean Missouri that just passed in the 18th district that I represent, it passed by over 70% of the vote. And we'll use the new nonpartisan plan to draw the maps. Or if this new initiative passes, then we would basically go back to the old way. And a little perspective on that, and why I think it's important is that, you need, if you look at the way that the Missouri House of Representatives is currently split, there's 49 Democrats and 112 Republicans now in 2 vacancies. And if you go back and look at all of the statewide elections over the last 3 or 4 cycles, the worst any Democrat did in any election statewide at all was the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump president race. And Hillary Clinton got about, I think, 39.5% of the vote or something like that. So if you just use that number, the partisan difference in the House would be, but there'd be about 12 more Democrats. So basically, the goal of Clean Missouri is not to get more Democrats or more Republicans. The goal of Clean Missouri is for the legislature to reflect the will of Missouri voters, which no matter how you do it, it's going to be more Republican than Democrat because that's the state that we live in. So the intent is not to benefit or hurt any political party. The benefit of changing the way we do it is so that the partisan makeup reflects the partisan makeup of the state. And my personal fear is if we go back to the way that we've been doing it, we're going to get the same results, which is where the partisan split just doesn't reflect what the voters want.
Right. If the voters reject this latest change and the Clean Missouri revisions that were passed in 2018, if those go into effect and stay into effect, how do you think that would affect this part of Kansas City? Your district and the surrounding districts. Do you think that they would be? I mean, obviously you wouldn't play a role in drawing them, but do you think that they would look different than they do now?
So there's a couple of things there. One is they're going to look different no matter what, because Clay County is growing quite a bit, and then that's a really good thing. We've had good economic growth the last 10 years, and I think we're ending up with about 30,000 more people in the county now than we had 10 years ago. A House seat is about 38,000 people, so the county is going to get almost an entirely new House seat no matter what, no matter how the districts are drawn. So that's good because we'll get more representation. The flip side of that is, one of the reasons I enjoy being in politics in Clay County, it's one of the very few remaining places in the state that's actually pretty split. So at the county level, a Democrat has a chance to win, a Republican has a chance to win, and I think what we end up getting is, not all the time with our current situation, but I think you get better government when either a Democrat or a Republican can win. So it is a fun place to be involved. What we have in the House in Clay County is we've got 6 full House seats and 2 partial House seats in our county, and 1, maybe 1.5, depending on how you count, is truly competitive for Democrats and Republicans. So we're selecting most of our state reps from Clay County to go to Jefferson City. Right now, we're doing it through the primaries. I would like to see the districts redrawn a little bit so that we're doing it through the general elections. What I'm saying is, I think the better way is for it to be harder for me to get reelected, because I've got a more formidable general election just based on the numbers. And in Clay County, we could draw under the way Clean is. If we use the Clean Missouri map, it will be harder for me to get reelected. If we use if we go back to the old way, it's going to be easier for all of us to keep our partisan districts and go back down there. So I guess that's kind of a twofold answer. One is we're going to get almost a whole new House seat anyway. And then 2 is I would prefer competitive general elections to competitive primaries. I think you get better democracy that way.
Although the counter argument to that is that if you have districts, you look in this area, your district, all the adjoining districts, I believe, of the House are all Democrat. So if folks in this area generally prefer to elect Democrats, and they are in fact getting Democrats, then what would be the reason to change it so that they would be more likely to be represented by Republicans who might or might not share the values?
And that's a pretty persuasive argument. If you look at the northern part of the county, where you've got Smithville, Kearney, and Excelsior Springs, where they're very conservative, and they prefer Republican state rep. And for the last 8 years, that's been my very good friend Ken Wilson. And whether he's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, whatever, I was at the prosecutor's office in Clay County when he was the chief of police at Smithville, and so we've known each other for a long time. We get things done. Doesn't matter what party you're at. That is a perspective in the sense that the way we've got it is, if you're from the northern part of the county, you have what you want, which is a conservative state rep. And if you're where I am in the southern part of the county, you get somebody more progressive. I guess my answer to that would be, so my house is right on the line with District 14, and that's a very competitive. That's one of the most competitive districts in the state. And so, and then on the north side of me is Noel Scholl's former seat where he's terming out, and that has the makings of a district that could potentially be competitive. And so I would say more of, we're on the edge here where I think we could redraw these to make them more competitive without losing the representation that the people want. That's, I guess, my personal opinion on that.
So I know you were disappointed in some of what came out of this year's legislative session and wished that more had been done to directly combat the pandemic. If you could have passed one piece of legislation, what would it have been?
So tracking and tracing, we should have invested so much more in tracking the virus and tracing the people that may have been in contact with people that had the virus. That helps first responders, that helps the elderly, that helps the economy because you're going to slow it down faster. The states and the countries that have had the best response to this virus are the ones that invested in tracking and tracing, and that would have been my first priority by a mile.
Do you see much hope of that happening in the future, or is that just a narrow window kind of thing that by the time we have another full legislative session, it may be too late?
So, I mean, hopefully, and I hope the governor's right on this, is hopefully we're on the backside of the curve and we can deal with what we've got. And I think that's the best case scenario, is it just becomes unnecessary because we wrote out the worst part of it. If it flares back up, I would hope that we would call a special session and get it right away.
Very good. I wanted to see if any of the members of our audience had any questions that they wanted to submit through the chat function. We'd be happy to get them asked and answered.
I'm on the phone calling in because I don't know, the link didn't work on the other. It's Jane Reinhardt. And thank you, Wes, for donating your time to us. And I think you've just been a font of information, really. And I mean, I understand what you're saying about the expansion of Medicaid, but I really think that's an area that is necessary and needed, because people just keep using like the emergency room versus being able to establish a relationship with a medical care provider. And I know people say it's going to cost a lot more, but I don't think that's necessarily the case in the long run. That's just a comment from a concerned voter.
And first of all, thank you for your work on the school board. And secondly, I agree with trying to be not too partisan and just kind of lay out the facts, but I agree with you. And I know there's a lot of states whose budgets are actually benefited. And then two, what I keep coming back to is hopefully if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we need to invest in the health of our community. And we're finding people that either that may be sick at work, but still showing up to work because that's the only way they can get health care. That's going to make a pandemic worse. It's not going to make it better. And Medicaid expansion is one way to directly impact that in a good way.
I agree completely.
Thanks, Jane.
You're welcome.
And I know we do have one other person who is who called in to the meeting, but unfortunately that way doesn't show your name. Who else do we have on the line? Is that you, Kathy?
I am here. I don't have a question, but I am here.
Very good. I thought that was you. I just wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Well, Wes, we don't want to take up any more of your time than necessary. I thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all you do in Jefferson City. And hopefully by the time next year's session rolls around, you will have some good news to share with us. Oh, wait, hold on. We do have one other question here. Oh, just a comment saying thank you, Wes.
Oh, good. I'm going to get off easy then. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. And always, you know, again, my cell phone's 816-560-0593. Call me or email me if there's everything I can do to help. Please let me know.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm just going to have a few quick announcements for the neighborhood association. And Wes, if you need to jump off, feel free. We don't want to keep you unnecessarily. So as I mentioned, we do have upcoming elections. You know, obviously neighborhood association doesn't tell you how to vote, but we do encourage you to vote. So please do what you can. If you have not yet sent in your dues, we sent out a mailing in the first part of the year. with an envelope, but you can always just mail them to P.O. Box 11042. That's Kansas City, Missouri 64119. And we appreciate that. Dues paying members of the association do get free use of our dumpster day. This year will be Saturday, July 18th. We had to push it back from May, but we do not yet quite know if it's going to be held at Northminster Presbyterian where we normally meet, or if we are going to move it to an alternate location. If we do that, it would probably be at the park at 55th and Highland, which is where we used to hold it a few years ago. The next event that we are having will be our block party for Neighborhood Night Out. That is on Tuesday, August 4th. Obviously, we are hoping that social distancing regulations at the time will permit that to take place and make it fun, but we don't really know what to expect. So stay tuned, and we will try to do that in the safest but most enjoyable manner that we can. And then our next general meeting is September 24th. And we are scheduled to host Senator Lauren Arthur, who by that time we may know a little bit more about what's going on with the budget and the state economy, and I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about. So, very good. Well, thanks again to Wes. Thank you to all of you who joined the call. And thank you again to Northland Neighbors for hosting this, making this possible.
Okay, well, Scott, thank you very much for coordinating out all of this for us. I appreciate it because technology is not necessarily always one's friend. So anyway, I mean, it's one thing to do Zoom meetings, and another thing to do team meetings, and then do phone meetings, and it's difficult at best. So I really appreciate that you've taken the effort, and you had a lot of great questions for Wes, and so thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yeah, these are a new technology. I've done a few of them. I never seem to quite get through any of them without some sort of technical difficulty, but it really survives. So,
yeah.
Very good. Does anybody have any last minute announcements, thoughts, or anything else that we need to cover?
Only question I have, Scott, this is Kathy. Is there any way to tell how many people have joined the session?
Yes, I have that. It's somewhat of a moving target, but yeah, I can send you those numbers of total number of people who came.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so the number that's up at the top of the screen talks about the number of people who are logged in by computer, and then there were 2 people who were logged in by phone as well. So adding those numbers up would arrive at that figure for you, Scott.
Yeah, yeah, and we had we did have a few other people who were on earlier who jumped off since. So I will get that to you, Kathy.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay.
Very good.
Just to verify that it's the PO box number is 11042, KCMO 64119, and the dues are 35.
Sorry, I should
right?
have said that. 25 is the basic dues.
25. Okay.
25. That's 25 per household. So no,
Right.
have to pay for each person.
Okay. Are we going to have a board meeting on the 2nd of June?
I think we are scheduled for one. I don't know that we need one at this point. But I will send an email. We'll see if there's any business that we need to take care of at that point.
Okay.
We're not
I just had it on
scheduled
my
to do
calendar.
anything until August. Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Thank you to Northland Neighbors, and we will see you all later.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.